We'll start with Kentucky and Gonzaga. Gonzaga pulls away with a 16-point victory, looking much like the Gonzaga we've seen the last few years. And I think this win was kind of much needed for Mark Few and his team after the way they struggled earlier this week against Texas. So, RC, let's go to you first. What did you see from Gonzaga tonight that made the difference for them compared to their struggles earlier in the week?
I thought they went to Drew Timme early and got him going. And it was interesting to see between the two bigs. I mean, who was going to do that? And I thought that they did a really good job of going at him. They got Oscar Tshiebwe in foul trouble, which is something that you got to attack Kentucky and you want to do. And it looked like to me, Timme took the matchup personally. I thought he went at him a little bit. He was really aggressive in trying to attack him and moving him and attacking him in many different ways. So you can tell they just seemed motivated. I don't know what that Kentucky team was doing the first half. They looked unmotivated. They just kind of just casually just walked out there. I thought like they felt like they were going to hit a switch and turn it on. But credit to Gonzaga. They needed to win. They were at home. But I think both of these teams after the recent performances needed to win. So it was just interesting to see Kentucky come out as flat as they did. But credit to Gonzaga. They had a lot to do with that.
Matt, do you think that this game says more about Kentucky and who they are, the result of this game being a 16-point loss, right? Or does it say more about who Gonzaga truly is going forward this season?
I think first and foremost, I want to credit both coaches for playing the game and for scheduling the game and for Cal taking his team out there to play this game. And, you know, you look at Gonzaga and just the overall schedule that they have and even the games that they have coming up. But, you know, we would be having a different conversation had versus Michigan State, Kentucky handled special situations a little bit differently, right? I mean, Kentucky had the game won at the end of that game and messed up a length of the floor situation. So I think it's a little bit of a different conversation. But I agree with RC just in terms of the first half, especially with the crowd that was in there. Kentucky didn't seem to have that level of effort that they normally play with. And again, they had some chances down the stretch. They cut into the lead. They had opportunities, but I think you got to give Gonzaga just credit the way that they bounced back. And, you know, I think that, you know, you go back to the Texas game and why Texas had so much success. And me and RC were talking about this off the air. You know, Texas had so much success against Gonzaga because they got Timme on the run. They put him in pick and rolls. They spread the floor out. They had spacing. And that's not really what Kentucky does on offense. And that played into Gonzaga's hands, in my opinion.
Do you think that's just matchup thing specific to this game, or is that something that could linger for Kentucky? Because me watching this tonight, and actually the guy who runs the Field of 68 daily, Mike Miller, sent a text right before we hopped on the show that was like, you know, I'd like to know what you guys think of Oscar Tshiebwe and just how he plays. Does that set this team with this personnel potentially up for failure on the offensive side of the ball? I jotted some quick numbers down, but 6 for 25 from three tonight, 7 for 25 versus Michigan State. CJ Frederick was brought in to shoot. But I think you go up and down the personnel side of who Kentucky wants on the floor in big moments. They don't have great spacing for him. Oscar, as great as he is as a motor guy, the putbacks, the rebounds, not necessarily the most skilled low post scorer. So I'm trying to watch this game and wonder, how does Kentucky even want to score? It's not ball screens. It's kind of just a mucked up game, right? Like what is that going to look like later in the season, Matt?
Yeah, I think too, it's a lot of pull-up jumpers off the bounce, you know, like elbow area jumpers, long twos, put it that way, right? Like, when I was a head coach, it was always, hey, we're trying to get layups, dunks, and rhythm threes. And, you know, contested twos is what we want the other team shooting. I think it's hard to say with a guy like Tshiebwe, you know, you look down at the stat sheet, he's got 20 and 15 tonight, right? And you're like, man, is he into his rhythm? Is he the same player he was last year? Obviously, he's dealing with an enormous amount of expectations coming into this season, which is something that he didn't really have going into last season. How is that affecting him? Is he in his rhythm, his injury, and everything like that? But I think floor spacing for Kentucky is a bit of an issue. And two, I think the other thing, do teams moving forward, do you see teams even try to play them a little more zone. You're successful with giving up offensive rebounds if you do that with Tshiebwe, but how does the spacing play out for Kentucky moving forward? I think that's going to be a big issue for them.
RC, we saw him in person.
I don't know how it changes though. Greg. I mean, Greg, how where does it change, Matt? I mean, who you look at their roster, the only guys that can make threes for them is going to be Frederick, Has-to, and Reeves. I mean, where else is it coming from? If those guys aren't making them, and even if, we talked about earlier about Toppin, I think Toppin is almost better when Oscar Tshiebwe is out of the game.
Yeah.
He's better when he's out, and you're playing these guys together, and all that does is restrict the paint even more. And then you throw into that's not Severe Willer's strength. And
right.
he's probably your best all-around guard. So they have to get better on the defensive end. I mean, that's what it is. They're going to have to play up. They can't, they're going to get up tempo. I think they did a good job of trying to get out and run, but they got to be better on the defensive end, turn defense into the offense, and they got to have a better commitment with that. That's the issue I think they have with Oscar Tshiebwe at times, because he's not a great ball screen defender.
Yeah, we talked about it in person a little bit earlier this week, RC, when we saw these guys. But, it kind of feels like it's not the Kentucky guards talent-wise maybe we've seen in the past. And that's no shot at Severe Wheeler. But, you're used to a Tyrese Maxey or even at times, a Ty Washington, like a guy who can just go out and get you 20 and do some scoring off the bounce. I don't think this team has that guy. And I think we alluded to it a little bit after the Champions Classic, but I think the hope would be that maybe Cason Wallace can be that guy. And I thought he was better tonight. He had 14 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 for 3 from 3. But the more that I see of him, I just don't know if that's really his game. Like, can he become the volume go-to scorer that this team might need, RC? What do you think?
They need him to do that on the perimeter, but what happens, he has to do primary ball handling responsibilities when Severe Wheeler leaves. So that's a lot to ask for a freshman to come in if that's not naturally what he does. So you want him to score, and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, I want you to be my backup PG and facilitate for everyone else. There's not a lot of creators on this team. There's not a lot of guys. I mean, Oscar is going to do it outside, but on the perimeter, who is creating opportunities for someone else besides Severe Wheeler? So now you got to ask, Wallace to do it. And again, that's a lot on his plate. He'll be better at it as the season goes on. But right now, he's got a lot to deal with. And there's so much coming at that team, right now, because they've lost 2 games already. They're 3-2. In Kentucky, in Lexington, the sky's falling right now. And he has to hear that as a freshman. He's never even experienced anything like what he's going through now, because all he's hearing is what he's not compared to all their freshmen.
John Wall. And this guy,
you're not John Wall. You're not, so
you're not John Wall. You're not.
He'll get that. He'll get that. He'll get through it. He'll be better at it. But again, this team struggles from the perimeter. And I don't know if they can fix it. It's just a matter of finding. The hardest job for me, I think, for Kyle this year is finding out what combination works. And you've had so many injuries early on. They missed so much practice time. I know people don't want to hear that, but they missed so much practice time. You don't know what works because guys have been out. And I think that'll be his hardest job going forward, because this team, one, we know shooting, they'll have games where Frederick's going to get hot, hit some shots. Reed's been scoring about 12 a game, but he's shooting okay. He's not a volume 3-point shooter. They just don't have that. So is Toppin going to knock down a couple? I mean, I don't think they'll be 6 for 25, but I also know they're not a 12 for 25 team consistently either.
Yeah, but Greg, I agree with RC too. I think they've got to develop an identity on the defensive end of the floor, right? Because if they can put their chips there and hang their hat on that and develop an idea to maybe create some steals, get into passing lanes and push the tempo and get out on the break with their athletes, that's where they can score. If they get into a half-court game and teams are going to pack it in and play a pack line defense and almost dare them to shoot from the perimeter, I think that's where they'll really, really struggle. But put your identity on the defensive end of the floor, deny, get in some passing lanes and get transition opportunities. And listen, when you do that in Rupp Arena, I mean, the roof comes off with how many people are in there, right? I mean, I've been in there plenty of times, and that place gets loud. That's an extra, 4 or 5 points a game. So I think that's where they got to put more of their focus, like RC had said earlier. They got to put more focus on the defensive end and just try to get some more easy baskets, because they'll struggle in the half court, and we saw it.
Yeah, and I think personnel wise, I don't have any questions that this team could be an elite defensive team. I love Case and Wallace on that end. Obviously, Tshiebwe is an anchor, but I think Toppin's a pretty damn good defender. Like, I think the guys they want to play can 100% buy into that. It's just, are they going to go out and execute on it? The one guy I would have a concern with, okay, we got to win games on the defensive side of the ball, is CJ Frederick. Guy who started in the Iowa system. He didn't shoot the ball well tonight. They want him to be the volume shooter and provide the spacing for this team. But I don't know that I'd say it's a coincidence that the two Gonzaga two guard and the wings that I talked about had a pretty big night. He might give up quite a few on that end this year. So if they do become that defensive team, I'd be curious if, does Reeves make an impact on that end? Does he cut into the minutes there? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.